Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is brought to us by Marvel Studios in the latest installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton and tells the story of Shang Chi, who's forced to confront his past after he's drawn back into his father's Ten Rings organization, and the ones that he cares about are threatened by evil forces. Naturally, as a fan of the MCU, I was interested in seeing this anyway, even though I wasn't really that jacked about it. It looks like a really interesting perspective that we hadn't seen in the MCU at this point. And now that we've gotten past the Infinity Saga with the Avengers and Captain America and Iron Man, Marvel now has a bit of a free rein to go in different areas of their universe that they hadn't really touched on yet, and expand on certain things that were planted all the way back in certain movies, as we'll talk about in this video. And just a warning, we're going to go into some spoilers about the movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, get away, or if you don't care about spoilers, stick around if you'd like. If there's anything I miss, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, just remind me in the comments section, politely please. The film opens with a narration of Zhu Wenwu, who's also later revealed to be the Mandarin, forms the group of the Ten Rings, where he uses actual 10 rings around his arms and grant its user immortality and great power, and he amasses an army that he calls the Ten Rings, conquering many kingdoms and toppling governments throughout history. He meets a woman in search for a village called Ta Lo, and he ends up marrying her and having 2 kids, and is able to reform his life. But then certain things happen where his children go their own separate ways, and then it cuts to the present day where we see Shang-Chi, or Sean, as he calls himself, along with his friend Katie, played by Awkwafina, our valet parkers in San Francisco, just living a modest life there, trying to make their way, singing Hotel California on karaoke nights and all that stuff. But certain people from the Ten Rings organization show up, and Shang-Chi is forced to confront his past and goes to look for his sister in China. The whole time as I watched this, up until the bus fight, I thought, okay, am I gonna buy this? But then when that fight happened on the bus, I knew that this movie was gonna be really special. And this movie does have a few MCU things that we've come to expect, like Wong makes an appearance, Trevor from Iron Man 3, played by Ben Kingsley, shows up, and there are a couple of post-credit scenes that set up for future events in the MCU. And there is a big battle at the climax that happens where I think it's definitely in vein of the MCU, but it's done in a very different way, which I actually appreciated. And in execution, I think they did a great job. The fight scenes that we see in here, like on the bus, in the building where he has to save his sister, it reminded me a lot of the little bits that I've seen from the John Wick films, some parts that I've seen from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or The Raid, and even a little bit of the Mortal Kombat movie, which I saw earlier this year, and I didn't do a video on that, and I thought it was okay, but not my favorite. That's a whole nother thing. The choreography and the cinematography make the fights really exciting, and you can tell what's going on. There's no gimmicks like shaky cam that's used, and if there is, it's done for a purpose. For the most part, I was able to tell what was happening, and I could tell that a lot of these actors in these scenes were actually doing their stunts, unless it's CGI and I'm just a complete idiot for not noticing. I was really impressed, and that bus fight in particular, that's gonna stick with me for a while. And it almost reminded me of the scenes from Speed when they're on the bus trying to avoid certain high traffic areas and not slow down. Hopefully I said this right. Simu Liu, who plays Shang-Chi, he's one of the best crafted protagonists in the MCU. Very charming, very likable, and very endearing. Does a great job of showing that he has all this pain boiling down inside of him, but is able to keep it very subdued, not to the point where you're not able to connect with him on an emotional level. You could tell that there's a world of regret that's boiling underneath him, because it's revealed that he abandoned his sister while going out to avenge the death of his mother, which he witnessed when certain people from a gang that the Mandarin encountered came back for retribution, killed his mom instead, and he felt guilty that he didn't do anything about it. And then when he decided to go avenge his mother's death, he couldn't go through with it and still has a lot of resentment towards his father as a result, who felt like the one chance that he had at redemption was taken away. And when he hears his wife's voice from the certain place that basically turns out to be a facade where it preys on people's deepest desires, he's blinded by his own desire to have his reformed life back. It almost seems like he doesn't really care about his kids, but it turns out that he actually does. Awkwafina as Katie is also really good in the movie and is basically the comic relief, but not to the point of annoyance. And some of the MCU films have a tendency to do that, not all the time. There were a couple of times where I was bracing myself where she would come in with some really funny one-liner. Thankfully that didn't happen. They had the right amount of comedy and seriousness balanced in here, and Marvel is known for coming up with their own sense of humor. This is one of the times, thankfully, they've been able to use it appropriately. And one thing that this movie does, just like with other MCU films, it improves on previous entries where you see certain things happen and it makes you scratch your head In this case, they bring Ben Kingsley's character back from Iron Man 3, Trevor, who was posing to be the Mandarin to antagonize Iron Man, and it turns out that the real Mandarin, Shang-Chi's father, was using him as a facade to accomplish whatever his goals were behind the scenes. And they bring him back in this movie as obvious comic relief alongside Awkwafina. Thankfully, it's done appropriately. Ben Kingsley is able to ride that fine line of being very buffoonish and not coming off too insufferable and like a complete idiot. Considering that he's one of the best actors that's ever lived, it's hard to argue. So they're able to find their way to the village of Ta Lo, going through a secret maze that's only open at certain points of the day or certain times of the year, and they discover their mother's sister, their aunt, who tells them that their mother is not actually alive, and that it's coming from a place where this big dragon of sorts is hiding underneath a secret doorway, and it's using the voice of their mother to draw their father into a trap in order to unleash this great evil out into the world. And they've been preparing for this day for thousands of years, and there's a danger that it can actually come true, and there will be no way of stopping it. So once the 10 rings and the Mandarin arrive, the villagers and the 10 rings are able to band together when the creatures start coming out. Shang-Chi, after an encounter with his father, tries to reason with him and is able to use the similar methods that his mother used on him when they first met. In a very Dragon Ball Z type of manner, he's able to incapacitate him, but unfortunately the creature gets out anyway. CGI fest or not, as some people I've seen complain about, I gotta say, I was a little bit scared of that. Kind of reminded me of Hobbit and the Desolation of Smaug when you see Smaug come out in his full size. I literally said, good God. And the Mandarin himself is actually, I think, one of the best villains that the MCU has had to offer. The villains are usually not the most memorable in the MCU. Besides Thanos and Loki, some are actually not bad, like Obadiah Stane in the first Iron Man, the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming, or Killmonger in Black Panther. The Mandarin, I'm not exactly sure if he's the villain necessarily. He is the villain in a sense, but his reasons for doing what he's doing, it actually makes a whole lot of sense. Seeing the relationship that he has with his children, or particularly his son Shang-Chi, it kind of got to me a little bit emotionally. And I was really pleased to see that they didn't treat this guy as just another throwaway villain. And just like in the other films, dads have a tendency to be real sweethearts. So the Mandarin gives his son the 10 rings, and he's able to use it in order to fight the dragon that's attacking. And Katie, who's trained to become an archer, is able to shoot an arrow through this dragon's throat. And Shang-Chi is able to apologize to his sister, promising her not to leave her again like he did before, leading to a really big victory over the forces of evil. He and Katie go back to San Francisco, but then they get a message from Wong, played by Benedict Wong from Doctor Strange, that something has come up that requires their attention. And speaking of that, that's one of the biggest MCU things that is in this movie, but thankfully it's done with a purpose. Like, when we first see Wong, he's fighting the Abomination from the Incredible Hulk in this big fighting ring that Shang-Chi's sister is running in China. It is kind of like a way saying, hey, remember this from the other MCU films? Love us, fans, love us, but not in an insufferable kind of way. And thankfully, Benedict Wong adds a lot to the movie because he's just really that likable and really funny in his own way with his deadpan humor. And how they include him in the karaoke scene at the end where he's singing along to Hotel California. Like with American Pie and Black Widow, I'll never listen to that song the same way again. As for problems, I kind of wish there was more depth to the characters, and I feel like maybe we could have gotten a scene or two where we actually saw what it was like for him to go avenge the death of his mother. To my recollection, they don't really do that, but I'm assuming that they're going to be exploring that in a future sequel, because they do say in the credits the 10 rings will return. If they revealed everything all at once in this movie, I don't think it would have had as much staying power or leave us wanting to have more, because this is an ongoing serialized series in a way. And I've seen people talk about this where this movie is just once again setting things up for the future and it's just a big giant trailer of some kind. I don't think that's the case here, and I understand why they think that. This is a Marvel movie, it's in the MCU, it's gonna have formulaic elements to it. And I think they found the right amount of original things to do while keeping it in vein of the MCU framework. If stuff like that bothers you, like having a certain character from another movie show up and post-credit scenes that tease you for something that's coming in the future, if that bothers you, then I can't help you. It's a Marvel movie. You gotta know what to expect. And certain shots are noticeably green screen, and I think that maybe they could have changed the lighting a little bit, and I think they could have toned down the lighting to make it look like it was actually filmed in an outdoor environment of some kind. And the film does kind of drag on a little bit in the second act. I think they could have shaved off 10 minutes at least to keep the pacing pretty fluid. Other than that, I don't really have that big of a problem with this movie. It's got exciting action sequences, great characterizations, and it sets the stage for exciting new possibilities in the future of the MCU. On that note, with the mid-credit scene, where we see Wong, Katie, and Shang-Chi talking to Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner about how the 10 rings were able to emit this signal to something or someone, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, and maybe there's something in the comics that I don't know about. I never really read the comics, so anyone who's out there who has a knowledge of it, just let me know. Could it be tying into the Eternals? Who knows? We'll see. But either way, I'm really excited to see what we get from future MCU films. Now that we're in a post-Endgame era, they have a lot more free reign and more creative liberty to go in certain areas that they never touched on, as I said earlier. And I really cannot wait to see what they bring to the table. And if anyone was worried about superhero fatigue or comic book movie fatigue, based on the box office returns that we're seeing from this movie, especially from the North American standpoint, the MCU is pretty much here to stay. Sorry, but if you were hoping that it was over...
Sorry to disappoint.
So those are my thoughts on Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. What are your guys' thoughts on the movie? Comment below and tell me your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next video.